If you're building yourself an ITX computer and you're trying to decide on a case, you may end up struggling between these two: the A4-H2O made by Lee & Dan case and the Fractal design Terra. They're both reasonably similar in size, they both have sandwich layouts for your components, but the end result ends up being quite different. So depending on what you need your computer to do, you may be better off choosing one case over the other. Let's take a closer look at each case and see which one's right for you. Both of these cases are excellent lookers in my opinion. Both are classy and minimalistic, but in a slightly different way. The A4-H2O has a sharper design and is more boxy of the two. It almost looks like something you'd see from Apple. It's about 3 cm taller and about 2 cm shorter than the Terra. The Terra is smaller and more rounded, and is really nice to look at, especially with that wooden front panel. They both come in black and silver, but the Terra comes in this nice colour called Jade, which is what I have here. Overall, this is down to opinion, so both of them get a point. Both cases are built by large-scale case manufacturers, which means that as a result, they're more readily available than other high-quality small form factor cases like the Formd T1 and the Ncase M1. Here in the UK, the H2O is about £160 versus £175 for the Terra, so they're pretty close, but this point goes to the A4. On the H2O you get a steel chassis with aluminium panels, and on the Terra you get slightly thicker aluminium panels plus that little touch of walnut. Their specs page doesn't say what the internal frame is, but I'm going to presume that it's steel. Both of them have panel gaps here and there, but they're not really a big deal. Overall, they're both solidly built. In my opinion, the Terra comes out slightly ahead with its moving internal frame, which I think is quite innovative, and the gull-wing doors are novel but also very easy to use, and you don't have to use your nails to rip off the panels like you do with the A4. The Terra also has a nicer unboxing experience, so if that's something you care about, take that into consideration. It's a real treat. The power button on the Terra is also more satisfying than on the A4. I always felt like the button on the A4 was a bit disappointing. Overall, I think the Terra pulls ahead, but it is close. I don't think you'll be disappointed with either. Both cases require planning in terms of your components, and your component choices are limited, but just in different ways. If you want to build a high-end workstation with both a high-end CPU and GPU, the A4-H2O is definitely the case to get. It pretty much forces you to use a 240mm water cooler, and the entire case is pretty much designed around it. You can use an air cooler, but you're limited to 44mm, which leaves you with basically a Noctua L9, which can barely cool down a phone, let alone a workstation processor. For the GPU side of things, you have space for 3-slot cards up to 335mm, so you can fit in pretty much any graphics card that you want. For the Terra, you can either have a massive graphics card or a bigger CPU cooler, but not both, so you will need to make a compromise somewhere. In my final build, I ended up using a Noctua NH-L12S, which is about as big as you'd want to go in a case like this, and that allowed me to fit in my 2-slot 3070 without any issues at all. But overall, this point goes to the A4-H2O. I found building in the Terra to be considerably easier than the H2O. The instructions are clearer and more helpful, and they give you suggestions on layouts, and putting in the components just feels like less of a struggle. For example, to put in the graphics card, you remove the riser cable entirely and place it in there before screwing it back in, so you don't have to shred your hands trying to fit the card into the case and aligning it with the riser cable. That's not to say the A4-H2O is too difficult. The hardest part I found was routing the cooling tubes, which I had to orient them around the power cable. Both cases are considerably easier to build in if you have custom power supply cables. So for ease of building, this point goes to the Terra. Because the A4-H2O can house a 240mm water cooler, this ultimately means you can remove a lot more heat from the CPU than any air cooler you could ever fit inside the Terra. The A4-H2O wins this category hands down, and let me show you why. Air gets sucked in from the sides and then pushed out to the top. With the Terra, it doesn't have any consistent airflow, and even when you add the optional fan at the bottom, air is flowing in all different directions. And also because of the cutout design of the Terra side panels, if you have a CPU cooler fan really close to the panel, it suddenly becomes very loud, which is definitely an odd quirk of this case. The A4-H2O with Noctua fans and a custom fan curve is the quietest PC I have ever owned. but you do always hear that pump in the background, which is not something you have to worry about with the Terra. But yeah, this one goes to the Dan A4. So overall in my test, the Dan A4 comes out slightly ahead, but it's not as clear as that. These two cases are aimed at two different types of people. I think you should get the A4-H2O if you're using high-end components and you really care about your system being as quiet as possible, and if you don't mind water cooling in general. Some people don't like it. And I think you should get the Terra if overall you just prefer the look. It's not very often you get a green PC case. Also, if it's your first time building an ITX system, it's really easy, so this is a nice introduction to it. And as well, if your parts are only mid-range and they don't suck a lot of power, this case is perfect for that. So there you go. I hope my tests have helped you make a decision. If you want to pick up either of these cases, you can check out the links below. Subscribe for more small computer content, and I'll see you in the next one.